Okay, Christian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time to do this with me. I'm just excited that you're here. You know, you and I have a long history together. I consider you to be one of my mentors because you took me on as a student and sort of got me started in this process. And I want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, just sort of telling your story about sort of how you chose medicine, how you ended up in hospice palliative care, and how you ended up in Kansas City. How did you end up here?
So, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's always good to work with you, and so I appreciate that. But for me, I graduated med school in 2000 from the University of California, San Diego. Grown up in San Diego most of my life, although I've been living here in Kansas City since 2004. But was interested in medicine because at a young age I was a burn victim from bathtub scalding and have had several surgeries, over 20 surgeries on my legs to help reduce scars and that sort of thing. So I was really intimate with the medical system from a very young age. Yeah. So, had those ideas of I'm going to be a burn surgeon, that sort of thing. And I got to med school and I did a surgery rotation, and the first day on burns, I was like, I can't do this. This is not going to work. Thankfully, I had a background in geriatrics from some of the anthropology work I did as my undergrad, and really appreciated geriatrics as a culture. What is the culture of elderly people as a group, but also across different cultures. And so I done some volunteering at nursing homes before getting to med school, and just really appreciated that patient population, their unique needs. And so that drove me into internal medicine and a primary care practice, and was really looking at geriatrics. And that was at Wake Forest in North Carolina.
So how did you get from San Diego to Wake Forest? How did you make that leap?
My wife is also a physician, and so we couples matched, and we had pretty much lived our whole lives in California, and we had just gotten married, and we were looking to branch out. So most of the places we interviewed at were outside California because we just wanted to kind of go on a little adventure for 3 years. And North Carolina was a good mix of outdoors options and a good solid primary care program, which I liked. And so that's how we got to North Carolina. And there I was in a primary care tract, so we had a lot more outpatient. Wake Forest has an excellent reputation for geriatrics training. And there did a lot of geriatrics, was getting interested in it, but I found a unique area that really started to call to me, which was the ICU. And I'm like, the ICU is not, is not primary
not what
care.
You wanted,
No. But the thing I realized I liked about the ICU is although putting in lines and doing procedures is definitely intellectually very stimulating, and to be able to do aggressive medical care and see someone bounce back for that is professionally so rewarding. I enjoyed those aspects, and I thought that's what I liked about ICU, but I started to realize on night, when I was doing night float rotations, and that's where you're just doing nights, night after night after night, I started realizing there were lots of families who wanted to have conversations, and the attending wasn't there. It was me, the resident, to start to have these conversations, and families asking what's going on, like could you sit down and talk to us for a little bit. And I would happen to have enough time, or I'd make enough time to really have those conversations about what is happening, what we're expecting, and that led me to asking my attendings, what is the prognosis for the patient? How do we know we're doing good things that are going to help them improve, as opposed to we're just getting them through this ICU day so they can get to tomorrow's ICU day? And those types of questions really prompted them to push me towards the local hospice medical director, who was interested in doing a palliative medicine fellowship. And I didn't know that there was extra training in these types of conversations, that there was a career you can make out of hospice or palliative care. And this is in 2003.
Okay.
And it was Dick Stevenson.
Okay.
I don't know if you know Dick.
I think I've met him.
Yeah, great guy. Initially was in Maine and then in North Carolina, and he was looking to start up a volunteer fellowship. And at that time, hospice and palliative medicine as a training specialty was all volunteer. There were only a handful of training programs in the country, so they were all going by some voluntary guidelines of this is what we think of fellowship should look like. And Dick, or Dr. Stevenson, was very interested in doing that, and that sounded like a good fit for me with my interests, and so I signed up for that. Unfortunately, there wasn't a fellowship in Kansas City. Like I said, there wasn't a lot at that time, and our connection in Kansas City was that Kelly got her pediatric emergency medicine fellowship in Kansas City, so we actually had to live apart for a year because there's not a pediatric emergency medicine fellowship
there
in North Carolina, and there wasn't the palliative medicine fellowship in Kansas City, so we had to go where the training was. But that was really, it was actually probably good to be, we didn't have kids, we only had a dog. And it was good though, because it really allowed me to focus on my profession and my passion. And I just really, the more training I did at the inpatient hospice house there in Winston-Salem just drove that.
How big was the hospice house?
It was 10 beds at the time. No, it was 20 beds. Oh, wow. Actually, it was a pretty big.
That's pretty big.
Yes, it was big.
For that time.
It was 20 beds. I think they had just expanded maybe right before I joined. And I, as a fellow, I was pretty much running the inpatient unit because Dr. Stevenson was doing home visits, and I was doing home visits, and there was not a lot of pediatric palliative care clinicians, so they had a strong pediatric program, so I was doing pediatric home visits as an internal medicine doctor, but the specialty, the need for that specialty level of care was there, so there's a lot of on-the-job training and a lot of learning from hospice nurses, phone calls to my wife, being a pediatrician, checking.
Great resource to have, by the way.
Excellent resource. That was just a fantastic experience, and a lot of recognition of the importance of interprofessional support, that respecting the nurses and the social workers and really working with them and leaning on their expertise, especially since I was still learning so much of the field, that they really were as much my faculty as any physician was. And so that led to immense appreciation that I have from an early part of my training, that nurses, social workers, chaplains all have something definitely important to add to the care of a patient.
So then the next step, or the next question would be, so how you finished your fellowship, how did you end up in Kansas City? And did you immediately go to work for Kansas City Hospice, or how did that transition take place?
So my fellowship ended in the summer of 2004, and I was clearly looking for a job early in the spring of 2004 in Kansas City. And their KU had Dr. Porter Williamson, Carmen Porter Williamson, who had just come on after her fellowship. She was 1 year ahead of me in fellowship training, and she had just come on to be the new director at KU, but didn't have a program that was big enough to hire anybody. And Kansas City Hospice, their medical director, Dr. Ann Allegre, who is well known in the Kansas City area for teaching so many people about good care at the end of life. Kansas City Hospice was one of the largest hospice providers, and they were looking to hire a full-time physician because they were already doing palliative care consults at Providence Medical Center. So they had not only a robust home hospice program, they had a palliative care consultative program in the hospital, and they were looking at potentially in the future opening up an inpatient unit, because in 2004 Kansas City Metro did not have any inpatient units, and so that was kind of on their 3 to 4 year plan. And in 2006, they actually ended up they finally opened one up, and it was great because I was able to use my experience at the Kate B. Reynolds Hospice House in Winston-Salem to help inform some of the real world everyday issues that go on in the hospice house. Where the nursing, where the nurses are sitting compared to where the rooms are, and how that's different than a nursing home or a hospital. So all those things, I was glad I was able to bring some real world experience to that process.
And they have a beautiful facility.
Oh,
It's a
absolutely.
beautiful facility.
Down at 120th and Mortal, and it's just they have great staff there to fill out a beautiful facility too.
So how long did you stay with Kansas City Hospice?
So I was with Kansas City Hospice from 2004 to 2011,
Okay.
and we had grown that time. We had started a fellowship in conjunction with the University of Kansas. So Kansas City Hospice was the initial or the primary sponsor of it, but partnering with an academic medical center to provide their opportunities as well. But so that was started in 2005, 2006, so around the same time the inpatient unit was opening. And but we were expanding. We hired more medical directors. We opened up a palliative care clinic. We were doing a lot more in nursing homes. We started a palliative care, home-based palliative care program. So a lot of growth and expansion in the area. So it was nice to be able to be a part of building those programs and seeing them grow and realizing some of the big barriers to making them actually happen. And so that was up until 2011. And at that time, I felt like I had exhausted a lot of my leadership opportunities. That Kansas City Hospice was wonderful to give me those chances. But a new opportunity came about to make an impact on a more regional, national scale, which was when I took a job with Gentiva Hospice, which some people may know as Odyssey. Odyssey and Gentiva joined together, and now Gentiva is part of Kindred.
Okay.
So,
I wasn't even aware of all that.
Yeah, it's
okay.
So I was with Gentiva up until it became Kindred, and about that time. So that's about 2 years. But what was great about that was I was the National Medical Director overseeing the Midwest and the Northeast hospice locations. So I was meeting with 70 to 80 different hospice medical directors at around 30 to 40 sites. And being able to see what hospice is like at different places is very, very eye-opening to recognize that when you are a hospice medical director, you think about the quality of your own hospice and the care that your team is able to provide. And there's always challenges and areas to improve. But you kind of think, oh, I'm sure a lot of other hospices are kind of like this. But when you start to see 30 to 40 different hospices and many different hospice medical directors, some who are very experienced, some who are coming in with very little hospice experience, you have a wider range of quality. And I really appreciate that role because it was an educational role. It was talking to doctors who had a passion for hospice but didn't have necessarily a lot of background in training and getting them up to speed on Medicare hospice rules, which can be challenging sometimes. And so that was great to see what hospice in Pittsburgh looks like is not always exactly the same as it is in Dayton or outside of Cleveland or going to Flint, Michigan. So I really enjoyed being able to travel then and meet lots of different hospice staff. The hospice executive directors at a site, really key to a successful hospice program. And I basically, it started to come down to me to a rule to say the programs that really excelled and were able to not only provide quality, but make sure they were, following all of the many rules that you have to follow is if you have a great executive director, you're going to make sure that you're hiring wonderful staff. And if you have a great hospice medical director who really cares about the staff and the patients and the families, those two pieces. If you have those, I could almost always trust those programs. If there were other programs where as a new hospice medical director or a new executive director, then I had to make sure that they had the knowledge to do the best that they could.
So, and it's another one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because you have such a unique sort of perspective on all of this, not only from your background and experience, but even from the things that you've done on a national level with the American Academy of Hospice Medical Medicine. So let's now transition and talk a little bit about how all of that started, because you've made such a tremendous impact, I think, probably on all of us, really. But in terms of how you got started, when you started with the American Academy of Hospice Medical Medicine, and the roles that you've played in that organization too.
So that probably goes back to fellowship. So we'll go back to North Carolina, and 2003, 2004, there weren't a lot of fellowship programs around, and I was a solo fellow, so I was in training all by myself. I didn't have any co-fellows to talk about and say, oh, this really stinks, or this is a really interesting situation that I came up against. What do you think? So without having that someone local and close, it felt pretty lonely. And then, of course, it was also lonely. My wife wasn't there. Chad Farmer was one of my co-fellows at the time I think it was in Minnesota, at Mayo. And he had started an email listserv. So a bunch of fellows, just their program directors would eventually find out about this, or we'd find each other somehow. And we grew this listserv that was roughly associated with the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. I don't know if it was official, is kind of semi-official. But anyway, the fellows would, share challenging cases, ask questions about even like salary for this volunteer fellowship, and how many faculty members do you have, and are you getting the training that you're wanting? And so it's really good to have that cohort of people. And we met up at that year's annual assembly in Phoenix and had sat down and said, let's make sure that fellows are represented. We're kind of voluntary fellows, and we want to grow the field, so let's make sure we have a forum with which to share the great things we're doing and bring attention, shine a light on challenges or problems that there may be out there. And so at that meeting, a group of us got together and we formed the professionals in training special interest group. So and that was in 2004 in Phoenix, and they elected me chair, and so that was great because I took that new mantle of responsibility, and at that time, the way you formed a special interest group wasn't necessarily clear. It doesn't have the formality that it does have now. It was just we got together, and there were about 15 to 20 of us, and I still have the attendance list at home. And we just said, okay, we're forming. So I went up to Jim Cleary, who was the newly elected president at the time, and I tapped him. He was walking down the aisle in the main auditorium, tapped him on the back of the shoulder and said, Jim, I'm Christian Sinclair, and I'm the new president or the new chair of the Professionals in Training Special Interest Group, and you're going to hear a lot from the fellows now. We are together, we're assembled, and we have things to say, and we have things we want to contribute to the field. So we now have a place, and so we want to be part of this academy. And he's kind of said, oh, okay, I can't stop yet. So that was great. And so that was in 2004, and we did work at the academy and still kept on the email list, but things didn't change probably until 2005 when I stumbled across a website by Drew Rosiel called PalliMed. Yeah. So Drew Rosiel was a third-year resident at the time. It was in this May June of 2005, and he recognized he was going into a palliative care fellowship and said, hey, I'm reading articles and I want to remember what I'm reading about them, so I'm just going to type up a few notes about them and post them on this blog. So 2005 blogs were pretty popular, growing out of lots of different industries, but there weren't a lot of medically focused blogs. They were starting to come into fashion at that time. And me being a technophile, I stumbled across it on a search one day and said, oh my gosh, this guy is so smart, so brilliant, witty, and he's finding stuff that I'm not finding. He's finding this in journals of gastroenterology. And I'm like, I don't want to read that. I'm not going to search for that on PubMed. And so I started commenting on it, and then And then eventually I started commenting and reading so much. I said, "Can I write with you? Like, can we write together?" And this was all through email, never a phone conversation. And he said, "Yeah, sure, okay, why not?" And so we both started writing together, and amazingly, we started looking at the views, and the views started going up. Like, the views were like 10 per day, like for a while, like 20 per day, like not a lot of people. And we started getting feedback like, "Oh, this is really interesting, or this is helpful," or people saying, "Hey, I shared this with my hospice team," and we started to recognize, oh, maybe this is having a bigger impact than we thought. And from that, just putting our opinions out there, our hopefully informed opinions, it started to get both of us more name recognition. We weren't pulling down huge research grants. I spoke occasionally at Academy conferences, but it wasn't like I was like the best speaker or anything like that. So didn't have big education credentials behind my name. But it's through social media and just writing down our opinions that quality, or at least the views and the feedback we're getting, was saying this is something of quality that people were getting some benefit out of that. And so we started working on getting more writers. And PalliaMed now, 12 years later, we're about to cross the 4 million page view mark. We have had, over the 12 years, we've had almost over 100 writers contribute to the website,
which is awesome.
It's all volunteer project, but it's been really fantastic. And because of that, I started realizing, maybe I have some opportunities to do some leadership. And I was already doing some minor conference work for the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, but I decided to run for the board. I wasn't exactly sure what you did on the board, but,
but you knew it was probably.
But I knew from saying that the fellows needed a voice, I wanted to be a young person on the board. I wanted to bring that voice to the fellows, and I figured I had maybe a little enough credentials from PalliaMed to say I'm not dumb, at least.
Well, and the one thing I want to make sure we capture here and say about PalliaMed too is, when you say you've had over 100 writers, guest writers, the writing quality is top notch. I mean, it is.
Some good writers.
It is like, I mean, it could be a journal in and of itself. Really.
Well, right. So people like Lizzie Miles, who's a social worker in Ohio, Emily Regal, who's a pediatric and adult medicine palliative care doctor here in Kansas City. And Drew Rosiel, Lyle Fettig. There's some really, really quality writers, and there's a few that I've actually turned away and said these need to be like submitted to JAMA or pediatrics, and there have been pieces that have been published other places that were initially submitted to PalliaMed.
Wow.
So.
I just wanted to make sure we got that in there, because it's top notch. It is really.
And I do want to say, I sometimes get the feeling that people come up to me and think that PalliaMed and so in around 2010, Drew stepped down from being the editor, and I stepped into the editor position. But sometimes people come up to me and say, "Oh, it's Christian Sinclair, that equals PalliaMed." But I definitely want people to know there are multiple volunteers. I want to give a shout out to a couple: Lizzie Miles, Megan Mooney-Sipe, Meredith McMartin. They have all done really, really great work to help make PalliaMed and the other social media brands or efforts under the PalliaMed umbrella. It's a volunteer effort, and it's a team effort. They may not get the attention or press, but they definitely make it happen. So
good. I'm glad you could do that.
Got to give a credit to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're always looking for more volunteers. So if you're a hospice or palliative medicine clinician and you have something to write, we'd always love to have it. So.
Excellent. So then PalliaMed, and so you ran for the board for the American Academy of Hospice Medical Medicine in
2007. And I didn't make it.
Okay. And then but that's okay.
So I didn't make it. That's okay, that's fine.
So then what happened?
So then I ran again.
Yeah.
Because you don't give up. Yep, you got to stand back up. So I ran again in 2008 and was elected then, and so I started serving on the board in 2009.
Okay.
And so that's been a great experience. And what's been really interesting is with PalliMed, I have my ear to the ground. I feel like I know a lot about what's going on in the fields of hospice and palliative care, just with the attention to social media and journals and that sort of thing. When I got on the board, it was a whole nother level of, oh my gosh, there's a whole lot more stuff going on than I was really aware of. And it's serving on the board really deepened my love for the Academy. It does a lot of work on a very efficient budget.
Yeah.
So the amazing areas, the breadth of areas that they're able to cover has always been impressive to me. So,
and I don't think people really know all the areas that they're actually. I think sometimes I wish we had a way to. And I'm going to have Steve Smith on so we can talk about that, because I think that is a message that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Of just how amazing on a what budget this is being done on is really incredible.
Yeah.
The areas that they reach into. So.
Right. And one of the things, I went in saying I need to be a voice for early career professionals and fellows, and recognizing that, there's so much work to do in advocacy and partnering with NHPCO on hospice issues, and then working on legislative issues and regulatory, partnering with the AMA on all the different things that can come in the House of Delegates from different states, and making sure that they are keeping hospice and palliative care clinical situations in mind, because sometimes that's not always the case. And so yes, the Academy has been a wonderful. It's been wonderful to see what the Academy has done and what our field is doing. And that, again, speaking of volunteer leaders, there's definitely paid staff with the Academy, but there's a lot of volunteer leaders who are doing fantastic things, and they don't always get the recognition. But I think that it is important to realize they are helping all of us who are in this field, and not just physicians, and making sure that we have an easier way to take care of our patients in a safe setting. So
and they provide a voice. I always see them as our voice in those settings, and you're 100% right. And even all the stuff that you've done, all of that volunteer out of your love for the discipline and all these things. So on the board. So when did you take over as the sort of president, and you're coming off your last term now? Or?
Yeah, I only have 5 more months now. March is when I'm off the executive committee, because I was elected as president and served as president from 2015 to 2016. 2016 to 2017. Yes, so up until February of this year, and again, there's a different level of knowledge. Like once you go from the board, from a member in leadership positions in the Academy to the board, you say, oh my gosh, there's so much more stuff, and then you get to the presidential level. And I was having weekly calls with Steve Smith, who's the CEO and executive director of the Academy. And all the different things that were, it's spinning plates. It's like you're over here making sure that's being okay, but you can't ignore this other issue too long. So that was a whole nother level. And it was great to be able to be on calls with Capsy and Diane Meyer and Donald Schumacher at NHPCO at the time, who was president at the time, and really work with all these different organizations, SWIPN and HPNA as well, to say what are the big things we have to pay attention to in our field, and that I really feel quite honored to have that opportunity. What was great about that position as well, and even something that I learned when I came into the board, I remember writing a PalliMed post and saying, hey, if you're a member of the Academy and you have any ideas, anything you want to talk about, just email me or post a comment. I remember going to my first board meeting, and they said, well, we have a process of how things get to the board. Like, it's not just like anybody's idea, like on the board. It's, our membership communities and our strategic coordinating committees, they all work together to bring up well-vetted ideas for us to move forward. But I still think having that closeness and accessibility to all members or to all people by that social media presence, and saying, hey, I'm approachable, please tell me. I got a lot of feedback that while I wasn't able to go and say, when the new business, like I got 4 ideas.
Yeah,
it wasn't like that, but it's been helpful to me in my leadership role to have heard a lot of feedback from people. And I'll tell you, this past year in election politics, in our national politics, I think everyone's recognized that when you contact your legislators, things can happen. It's the same way in your medical organization or your nursing organization. If you don't feel things are going the right way or you like to nudge it a different way, talk to the people who are in those leadership positions. They should be listening to you. They represent you, and it is important. So for all those people who have pulled me aside or sometimes called or texted or emailed me, I've appreciated that feedback, and I've taken that in different ways up to the levels where it belongs.
So one of the things that I want to say, and I'll make sure we capture on this audio piece of this and video too, first and foremost, is to say thank you. Thank you for your service and advocacy, because I don't know if you get to hear that enough when you're like in the throes of all the plates that you're spinning around. Thank you so much for serving in the way you have. And knowing you the way I do for all the background and years we've known each other, I also know that you would take any information that anybody gave you and you would use that, or at least help that person get to the right resource to help them. Right. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being in that position, because it is so amazing to see all the stuff that you've done in the challenges and the difficult times that we're in right now with hospice and palliative medicine. So thank you for your service.
That's very kind. You're welcome. I appreciate that.
So now we need to move a little bit forward, because I know our time is kind of getting a little bit cramped. So there's a couple of things I want to ask you from your perspective, because again, you have... of all the people that I know in the Academy, and there's probably a few, but you have such a unique sort of perspective, having done a fellowship, small, worked in a nonprofit for a long time, been a national medical director, worked on, that is really a unique sort of space. Yeah. Tell me what you see as our biggest challenges right now moving forward in the hospice palliative care world, and not only tell me what you think those challenges are, but help us and the people listening understand what can we do about it. What are the things we should be doing about it?
Right. Well, I think the biggest challenges is really making sure that hospice stays high quality care and solvent. It is, under attack's not the right word, but there is a lot of pressure as hospice has grown and been now a mainstream part of our healthcare system. It is not just a nice add-on, or it is significant. It is, several $1 billion, or I think
certainly got the attention of
Medicare. Yes. So it is not small money, and we need to make sure we're providing great care. That being said, some scrutiny is warranted, but we need to make sure that we are elevating that level of care for patients at home, patients in nursing facilities, and in inpatient units. And I think that takes the support of palliative care professionals who may not be doing hospice, but certainly know the issues, to also advocate for hospice colleagues as well. So I think making sure that we are paying attention to, and NHPCO has been a pretty big advocate for hospice, clearly, but really reading what are the legislative issues going on around hospice, around access, around payment reform, and they are trying some new ideas like the U-shaped payment curve, but I think it is important for all of us, not just because it may be our job in hospice or we know a lot of people that work in hospice, but I think just really for the care of all our patients. We know that many of our patients are going to use hospice at some point, and we want to make sure it's a high quality system.
And we want to make sure it's available.
Yeah, and available. Absolutely. So I think that would be important. The other thing is that we need to really be paying attention to is the opioid issue. It is clearly front page news
everywhere.
It's affecting our communities, and we need to not be afraid to address our role in maybe making that situation worse, but also making it better.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot of legislative issues around opioids that do have exclusions for hospice or exclusions for palliative care, but I don't think we should take solace and comfort in that to say, oh, good, we don't have to worry, we don't have to be scrutinizing ourselves and our own practices. And that's not to say that we are all of a sudden suspicious of everybody, but I think, doing really good screens of patients and families, talking about what are the likely areas of diversion, and being sensitive to patients' own past addiction issues. So currently I work at the University of Kansas, and we have an outpatient palliative care clinic in our cancer center. And just this year, we've implemented opioid addiction screening to talk about all of our patients before we prescribe opioids or soon after we prescribe opioids, about the risks and about their own personal risks. So we talk about family history and personal history with alcohol or illegal drugs or even prescription pill abuse, things like depression, and all traumatic experiences in life. All these things can potentially make those risks higher. And what's been amazing, we were initially hesitant, thinking people would push back at us and say, you think I'm an addict, or, and it would change our relationship. And we found that actually hasn't happened. And what's instead happened is we've gotten closer to our patients. They share their own personal struggles with addiction or traumatic experiences or depression prior to their cancer diagnosis. And they say, I am glad you're asking this, not only of me, because I want you to know this about me, and I want you to think about it as you're prescribing these strong pain medicines for me, but I'm also glad because I know you're asking this of other people, and that they're potentially being more safe, and their families are safe, and our communities are safe, because you're starting to ask this of everybody. So I think we need to make sure we are being an active partner and not just saying it's not a big issue in hospice and palliative care.
And that is such a great way to say that too, Christian, because I agree so much that we need to be on the forefront of leading that sort of thing, because we have to look at our role in that, our responsibility with that. And I'm glad to hear you say that you feel like it's bringing you closer and your teams closer to your patients and families, because I have that same experience. When we ask those questions, it's not as hard, I think, as I envisioned it to begin with. And so now talk a little bit about your role at the University of Kansas now, because it is really the things you're doing, and the palliative care program there is amazing. So talk a little bit about that.
So at University of Kansas Cancer Center, we have a palliative care outpatient program that has access 4 days out of 5 days. We're working 2018. I'm pretty sure we're going to get to that fifth day of the week. We're at 4 different locations throughout the Kansas City Metro, and every year we're growing by 20 to 30% in the number of patients we're seeing. And what's been great has been the open arms that we've had from the oncologists, the hematologists, the bone marrow transplant physicians. They have all recognized from the research that's out there and from the great work that Dr. Porter Williamson and all the staff that have done palliative care at KU have done over the years, that this is a value add to the patient, that palliative care can be at the same time as very aggressive, even curative care. We're seeing patients before they're going for transplants for leukemia, where they may be cured. They may go through a dark clinical valley where things look really dire and tough, but they may come out with a cure on the other side. But we're still being involved and recognizing that we're not there to automatically shift goals without talking to oncologists. We're there to be a partner, and it's been really wonderful. So much so that ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, last year put out a new clinical practice guideline saying that every patient with advanced cancer should see a dedicated palliative care team within 8 weeks of diagnosis.
Wow.
And I had recently brought that to one of our cancer committee meetings, and there was approval of that to say, let's figure out how we can do that sustainably and move forward. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more people upstream than we ever have, and we've already been doing a great job over the past 5 years of increasing that access, both time-wise and location-wise.
And what's really, from my perspective of being removed from the academic setting a bit, is that trickles down or filters down to all the other communities.
Yes.
I mean, you guys, I'm sure you see it from that perspective, but particularly in your role on a national level, but that in the state of Kansas anyway, that filters down to all the other communities that are served by hospice and palliative care providers.
We've had visitors from locally in the metro and also across Kansas come and visit us in our outpatient clinic to figure out how do we do this in our own institution. And I think where inpatient palliative care was a decade ago is really where outpatient palliative care is now. There's still a lot to learn. Holy cow. I am learning a lot about oncology, immunotherapies and all that stuff. I am doing a lot of reading on very non-palliative care stuff just so I can make sure I am having valid conversations with patients and families and with the oncologists and hematologists with which we co-manage together.
And you're speaking to, I think, a lot of what draws people into hospice and palliative care is that desire to learn. Always lifelong learning is constant in the background of everything that I think we do as a discipline. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for sharing that. Now I have two other quick questions, or maybe one. First, what kind of things do you like to do, or do you do intentionally to take care of yourself? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, that kind of. What kind of things do you do to take care of yourself?
So outside of the classic spend time with family, that's clearly important. Two things: one for body, one for brain. The body is I play ice hockey every Sunday, and I cannot tell you how satisfying body checking somebody is when you know it's a rec league. We're not going very fast. Trust me, I'm not skating fast. But just that physical release of running into someone is pretty just awesome feeling.
It feels good.
Yes, it feels good. And awesome. And I'm not a violent person, but it's just running into someone and just working really hard, making sure that your body is physically doing good is. And you're on
a pretty good team, right? Because I've seen some of the trophies.
We've won a championship recently.
All right.
But it's still rec league. It's nothing too big. And then the other thing I do is I really enjoy board games. That helps put my mind at ease in having a rule set. You got to follow these rules, but you got to maximize what you can do within these rules. I find that just endlessly.
So I suspected that would be one of your conversation points. So tell me what games you're playing most recently. What board games are you playing most recently?
So most recently, Fabled Fruit, which is a really fantastic game where the game's always changing. You basically set it up, and there's 8 cards, and those are the rules. But as you play, those cards disappear, and new rules come up. And then probably the other one I've really enjoyed lately is Spyfall. Spyfall and Codenames. And both of them are social games where you're trying to figure out how someone else is thinking. Code words, for example, we're both trying to guess a different word, and I have to get inside your mind and think, how would David understand the clue that I'm going to give? And I find that great. And it's nice because then your phones are away and we're just concentrating on each other. So
okay, thanks for doing this, Christian. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being the first person and telling your story. As always is amazing. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure, and I love what you're doing, especially with the Facebook videos too. That's fantastic.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right.